There is a passage in the Gospel that reads like a small seismic event hidden in polite prose. Matthew 6 contains instructions that unsettle public rituals, that make the scaffolding of reputation tremble, and that open a private door into a different economy of the heart. Picture a hill outside a crowded town, the dust lifting in pale waves, merchants calling their wares, and a voice that asks the crowd to stop performing for applause and to begin meeting God where no one is watching. What did Jesus mean when he told people to enter their room, close the door, and let the Father who sees in secret respond? In this video, we will trace that secret teaching, verse by verse, and show how it rewires ambition, generosity, prayer, and worry. You will see how a movement from spectacle to secrecy reconstructs the life of faith, and why this move is as practical as it is spiritual. To understand the power of that instruction, we first need to step into the marketplace, smell the spices, hear the coins, and see what the theater of religion looked like in the life of ordinary people. The scene is a provincial town on the edge of empire, a place like Capernaum or a busy street in Jerusalem, where Roman banners flap and synagogue leaders hold influence. Imagine Simon the tent maker bargaining with a leather worker named Jonathan as the sun sits low and the crowd streams toward the place where rabbis teach. Picture Mary of Nazareth adjusting cloth at her shoulder as she listens. The air smells of oil and straw and the metallic tang of coins. The elite, people like Caiaphas the scribe and Eleazar the Pharisee, move with a performance habit, their robes arranged to show status, their prayers long and public. The culture values honor and recognition so that giving, fasting, and prayer are currency of reputation. The tension is tangible. A hand slammed on a table could silence a marketplace. A whispered rumor could shift alliances. Jesus steps into that charged atmosphere and calls out a practice everybody has learned as necessary. A witness named Ruth later remembers the hush that fell when he spoke. A student, Thomas, leans forward and asks aloud what his teacher means. The exchange that follows is not an abstract lecture. It is a confrontation with the way the community measures worth. The sensory detail is relentless. You hear the flapping of banners, the creak of sandals over stone, the clink of coins, the murmur of approval when a pious act is performed, the acrid smoke of offerings. The crowd feels the invitation to stop the performance. The critique lands on public religiosity that seeks applause. At the close of this scene, one simple question will hang in the air like incense. Have you ever found your devotion shaped by how many eyes are on you? If this resonates, write in the comments, starting with the phrase, "My devotion becomes a show when you have." Little stories or memories to share because you will help others see the trap. Pause for a moment and breathe. If the description of a faith that performs for applause felt familiar, you are not alone. Share one practical example of a practice that has become a spectacle for you. Keep it brief. Say, "My vigil is," and finish the sentence. When you post, you are helping build a community honest about reforming its inner life. Your short confession can be the spark someone else needs. Now we return to the hillside where instruction changes the texture of piety and offers a different horizon for how God rewards devotion. Jesus does not merely tell people to be private for privacy's sake. He offers a theological inversion. Where the religious culture rewards visibility with honor, he says, the Father who sees in secret will reward openly. That is not an argument against community. It is a redefinition of where true economy resides. Read Matthew 6 carefully, and the phrase appears like a key phrase. The line about giving without sounding a trumpet is paired with a promise that the Father will reward. The teaching hugs the ordinary practices of giving, praying, and fasting, but it relocates their intention from external validation to inward trust. The structure is surgical. First, the behavior is named. Then the hypocritical motivation is exposed. Then an alternate posture is given. The verses act as a mirror held up to a heart that wants to be seen. To understand the force of the teaching, we must unpack words that are simple but radical. When Jesus calls the room the place to pray, he is saying that intimacy with God is private and not a product to be displayed. When he offers the phrase, Father who sees in secret, he invokes the personal name that grounds trust. Theologically, the passage insists that God is not a judge in the crowd, but a father in the quiet. Practically, it is a call to reorient daily actions so that they are directed to the Father and not to the gallery. The crowd listens. Simon asks, why would God reward secrecy? Mary answers, perhaps because God knows what cannot be staged. Thomas, curious and blunt, says, then what do we do with public worship? Jesus replies, and the conversation becomes a live rehearsal of priorities. This dialogue has 6 moves, and each line lands as a small lesson on motive and venue. The sensory scene tightens. You feel the warmth of the sun, hear the rattle of a cartwheel, smell the bread from a stall, see eyes searching for approval, and taste the dust on your lips. The teaching begins to feel like a surgical removal of pretense. The reward Jesus promises is a different kind of recompense. He contrasts the brief applause of people, those who have received their reward, with a reward that comes from the Father. To call it reward is to insist that God notices deeds that are unseen. The notion is theological and deeply pastoral. The reward is neither social capital nor ledger entry. It is communion with the Father, provision for needs, and a reorientation of identity away from public affirmation. Consider a short story. Marcus, a modest grain merchant, gives to the needy when no one is watching. Months later, his business faces a sudden shortage, and a trader named Lydia appears with a favorable contract. Marcus calls it a coincidence, and others a reamer. But Marcus knows the steadiness that comes from trusting God rather than applause. The implication is not cause and effect in a mechanical sense, but the cultivation of a life that is aligned with divine economy. Theologically, the passage reframes reward as relational. You give because you belong to a Father. You fast because you seek God. You pray because you live in communion. The practical test is immediate. Where do you look when you do a generous act? Do you seek recognition or the quiet of the Father? That choice shapes life and secures a kind of spiritual nourishment that outlasts public accolades. 2 short scenes dramatize the difference. In one, a leader called Simeon shouts his alms from the street to be praised. In the other, a widow named Hannah slips a coin quietly to a neighbor and finds peace that no applause can buy. The contrast is apparent, and the teaching lands like a lamp in darkness. Now, we will slow down and unpack the model of prayer embedded in the chapter phrase by phrase. The prayer, often called the Our Father, is not a liturgical relic to be repeated without comprehension. Each petition is a compass point that orients desire and dependence. The petition, Hallowed be your name, is an invitation to place divine glory above human recognition. The petition, Your kingdom come, reframes ambition as longing for God rule rather than personal promotion. Give us today our daily bread withdraws trust from hoarding and places it on providence. Forgive us our debts reorients us to the economy of grace rather than the public ledger of reputation. Lead us not into testing teaches how dependence navigates peril. Each phrase instructs posture and practice. We will go through each line and show how it disassembles a reputation economy and rebuilds a trust-based interiority. The analysis will be precise and applied. For example, the phrase daily bread opposes an anxious appetite for accumulation. In that short clause, Jesus argues for sufficiency and trust. The sensory anchors remain. Picture the texture of bread, the warmth of a loaf broken in 2, the smell of yeast, the roughness of a wooden table, the relief in a hand that receives. Then picture the alternative image, a purse stuffed with coin and a heart that still trembles. The theological reading is supported by cultural notes. First-century households prepared for scarcity through storerooms and social networks. The model prayer shifts reliance from stores to the Father and from visible largesse to daily sacrament of provision. We will show many stories. Jonathan, who once hoarded grain, begins to pray for daily bread. He opens his store and shares a measure. The result is not a miraculous multiplication on a ledger, but a changed neighborhood practice where trust becomes contagious. Peter watches and asks theological questions. Mary, who tends a small home, begins to frame her mornings around 10 minutes of silent petition and notices a slow unhooking from anxiety. We will quote the text exactly and then interpret line by line and apply. This careful exposition will take some time because the model is deceptively simple but densely packed. Alongside prayer, the chapter also addresses fasting and giving and reveals a consistent logic. When you fast in order to be seen, you have already received your reward. But when you fast in secret, the Father who sees in secret will reward. The point is the orientation of hunger. The practice itself is not denounced, rather the performance is diagnosed. Consider a short dialogue in an inner room between Anna, who has fasted for public recognition, and Ruth, who fasted because she mourned private sin. The exchange will have at least 6 turns and reveal motives, shame, and a path toward restoration. Sensory details track the scene. You taste the dryness on the tongue, feel the light weakness in limbs, hear the silence in the chamber, smell the oil from a lamp, see the shadow on the wall. The twin practices of alms and prayer form a theological loop. When giving becomes spectacle, it sustains prestige. When giving is secret, it sustains community. Practical instructions follow from this logic. Give without trumpets, and seek the Father. Fast with a face washed so that your fasting is not noticed. Pray without long public phrases so that your speech is not an offering to human ears. Each instruction slides into a life practice that can be tried tomorrow. The witness accounts we include illustrate outcomes. Marcus and Lydia, Hannah and Simeon, Anna and Ruth are examples that make the theological point tangible. The pattern repeats. The Father honors what is true and hidden, and this honor often takes the form of reshaped relationships and settled hearts rather than immediate notoriety. We must address the heart question that grows from this teaching. Where you store treasure is where your heart lodges. If your treasure is visible and vulnerable to theft, you will always live guarding a public image. If your treasure is in heaven, where moth and rust do not corrupt, your life is ordered differently. The passage severs the linkage between security and accumulation. It reframes vision. To treasure the kingdom is to live with priorities that cast worry aside. The text moves from ritual to psychology. It offers a cure for a pervasive human habit, the habit of anxious provisioning. The scene that dramatizes this will involve an encounter between a landowner named Marcus, a tax collector called Simeon, and a craftsman, Raphael, named Thomas. Their conversation contains 8 exchanges and shows the pull of worry, the memory of scarcity, and the decision to trust. Sensory details gather. You smell the oil of a lantern when the decision is made. You hear the whisper of wind through an open window. You feel the roughness of a coin. You see the ledger pages turned. You taste the bitter of a bitter herb taken in stress. The inner dialogue of Marcus will be narrated with psychological realism. He recollects a childhood evening when his mother hid a crust of bread because they expected raids. That memory shapes his accumulation instinct now. Yet when he prays the daily bread petition, he imagines his mother sitting calmly with an open door. The tension between memory and present choice is rendered intimately. We provide 3 moments of tension in this section. Each moment is expanded into 2 paragraphs that show conflict, memory, and a turning point. The first moment is Marcus confronting his hoarding when a neighbor begs for grain. The second is Lydia wrestling with public reputation when she is urged to donate publicly. The third is Peter, a young disciple, tempted to perform a faith that wins friends at the cost of truth. In each case, we show inner dialogue, flash memory, and the decisive step toward secret trust. These moments are detailed and carried by emotional gravity and theological clarity. The teaching in Matthew 6 did not vanish with the crowd dispersing on a Galilean slope. Its ripple shaped early Christian communities and later monastic movements. The preference for secrecy and interiority seeded practices among the desert fathers who retreated into silence. And it influenced communal rules in monasteries where fasting and prayer were relocated away from public acclaim and into disciplined rhythms. Augustine and later monastics like Benedict reflected on the hidden life as the soil of holiness. The medieval mendicant movements wrestled with public ministry and private devotion. During moments of persecution, the secret prayer sustained believers in the catacombs and in hidden houses. Names and institutions populate this history. Benedict of Nursia insisted on inner motive. Jerome retreated to study, and communities in Antioch and Alexandria developed routines that embodied the Matthew instruction. The sensory palette of history remains vivid. You can almost hear the stone cells, taste the thin bread of a monk, smell the incense in a hidden chapel, feel the chill of a cave where monks kept vigil. This lineage proves that the private practice of devotion is not an escape from community, but a formation ground for communities that last. It shows that when a people learn to pray for the Father and not for applause, they become steadier in hardship and clearer in mission. We come to the close now with practical steps and an epilogue that tracks transformation over time. First, a set of immediate practices you can try this week. 1. Choose a room or a corner and commit to 10 minutes a day of silent prayer with no recording, no sharing, no audience. 2. Give once this week anonymously without telling a single person and observe how your heart responds. 3. Fast once in private and journal what emerges in your interior life. These practices are small but coherent with the teaching. They reorient habits and test the promise that the Father sees in secret. If you do this for a month, you will likely notice a shift in appetite for approval. If you keep it 3 months, the pattern begins to solidify. There is no magic formula, but the discipline breeds trust. Theologically, the move is a return to the Father who sees, and to a kingdom economy that resists the volatility of public praise. Historically, the results are clear in communities that embraced internal formation. Practically, the benefits are reduced anxiety, clearer priorities, and deeper generosity that does not require applause. If this video has spoken to you, consider subscribing for more grounded exegesis and practical steps. We aim to help you translate ancient text into modern practice, so that your devotion is not a performance but a sustained encounter with God. Epilogue. Temporal. 1 month after you begin the practice of secret prayer, you will likely experience a subtle but steady unmooring from the habit of seeking eyes. The first few days may be awkward. You might feel conspicuous by not announcing your fasting or giving. You might notice an urge to post about your spiritual disciplines or to tell a friend what you did. Resist the impulse and record instead a private note to the Father. At the 1-month mark, many people report a quieting of the craving for approval. The 2nd month, the pattern becomes less voluntary and more habitual. Your heart begins to orient towards sustenance rather than spectacle. You begin to experience the daily bread not as a promise to be earned, but as a presence to be received. By 3 months, some friends notice a change in your demeanor. People like Peter or Lydia in our stories will describe you as more available, less defensive, and less anxious about recognition. At 6 months, the practice often reshapes relationships. When you give without a trumpet, you free others to receive with dignity. When you pray in secret, you become a person who listens better in public. Long-term, the discipline produces communities that are not fragile because they are not dependent on applause. They are steadier in suffering and more creative in generosity. Historically, the secret life prepared Christians for persecution and for faithful witness in hostile times. The epilogue is not speculative. It is a disciplined observation of how interior spiritual formation compounds into communal health. In one small church, a leader named Marcus committed to quiet prayer and anonymous giving for 6 months. The congregation slowly moved from a competition of displays to a rhythm of mutual care. Loans that had been withheld, feuds cooled, and a new pattern of hospitality emerged. That is the kind of practical, observable fruit the Matthew instruction invites. Remember the opening image of the hill with dust and sun. The teaching that asks you to close the door is an invitation into an economy where the Father is primary and applause is secondary. It asks you to trust that what God sees in secret matters more than what people see in public. Try the practices suggested. Test the promise. Share a brief confession in the comments starting with, "My devotion becomes a show when," and help us build a community committed to interior authenticity. If you want more videos that move from careful exegesis to life-changing practice, subscribe and join the conversation. The door that Jesus points to on that Galilean slope is still standing. Step through it and discover a Father waiting to reward what you do in secret.